right. Nice to be on stage to discuss one of the most controversial and debatable gray areas of how we can make blockchain flourish, the regulatory and the legal framework. We heard in the morning about the challenges, the technology challenges, and honestly, and Mr. Polemidis in the morning, he made it very clear, we did not yet deploy at scale blockchain applications. We have very nice efforts, proof of concepts, use cases. Technology is one pillar of, or one domain of the challenges. But there is another set of challenges that we need to be honest among us. And this is the regulatory and the legal framework. And European Union is still puzzled on this. We did not take the lead. Although some countries, Mr. Minister, are already taking this lead and they are trying to pave the way. I want to start by saying that we are not alone on these roads. China announced last week that they are embarked on a huge transformation journey, including blockchain cryptocurrency, and they plan to issue in 18 months' time their own cryptocurrency. So remember, China is the biggest powerhouse today in terms of growth as well as in terms of population. So we might find Europe lagging behind other geographies because China, which in 2017, if I remember correctly, banned cryptocurrency, now in just one top-down announcement by the president of China, they're changing the game and they say, no, cryptocurrency and blockchain is our future. So Malta is not as big as China, but you took this decision about a year or so ago. Very daring move and very bold, and congratulations. Mr. Minister, Malta is named as a blockchain island, and I'm sure that you have been asked this before, but in your opinion, what is the #1 reason for gaining this title?
Well, let me start by saying that I would never think of comparing the size of Malta with China or with any other country, actually. So,
yeah.
Because Malta, for those of you who don't know, is a very small island. It's actually the smallest country in Europe with just 500,000 of population and less than 400 square meters of land. So basically, just to put everything in perspective. But the beauty in technology is that what you do now, it's not a matter, or the success of your country is not anymore a matter of size. Being successful, especially in this new era, is more about being innovative, about understanding technology and making the maximum use of that technology. What we have done, Malta, is actually we recognize that. And I always say this, you cannot stop change. You cannot stop technology from continuing to evolve. And if you try to do that, many of the times, technology will take over. And you brought actually the right example from China. One of the biggest economies in the world could not even stop change, could not even stop technology, let alone other smaller countries. So we turned this into our advantage. We said, look, there is this innovative technology, and blockchain is just one case in point that we need to embrace. And there is no one particular reason for our country to have been given the title of the blockchain island. There are many reasons. I think the most important reason was the fact that the government actually have understood the fact that we have to embrace technology and adopt it into our day-to-day use. And I think the most challenging part is the lack of education. I still remember the day when I was given this responsibility under the Office of the Prime Minister. It was about 2.5 years ago. Just a week or two after being entrusted with this responsibility, I was speaking, keynoting at a conference in Brussels. And that was a time where, at European level, there was this discussion of whether, as European countries, we should ban the use of crypto and therefore automatically the ban of technology of blockchain, because even there, I think there's a huge lack of understanding and lack of knowledge between the difference of crypto and blockchain and what can be done on blockchain and what can be done with crypto, etc. But it was a time where at European level, there was a discussion whether to ban or not this type of technology and the use of this type of technology. Apart from the fact that you cannot ban the use of technology, I cannot really understand how you can ban it, because technology could be operative also not through borders.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, we delivered the message and said, look, Europe has got only one choice to make in this era, whether we want to lead or to follow. And in Malta, we answered that question by saying that we want to lead.
Okay.
And the fact that we're treading in this uncharted territory, I think it got the trust of the operators, of the industry, of the regulators per se. And that was the time when we're actually given this title. So.
Great, thank you very much, Minister. Another small country that is trying to follow, not lead, but closely follow and collaborate with is Cyprus. And Demetra Kalogerou, the chairwoman of Cyprus Securities and Exchange Commission, is also putting a lot of effort to regulate, to come up with the right framework and the regulatory framework for blockchain and DLT technology. So, Mrs. Kalogerou, which aspects of blockchain does Cizek aim to regulate and why?
First of all, thank you for inviting me in this panel. This subject is very controversial also for the regulators. Even our own regulator, ESMA, didn't come up with the right regulation for this type of assets or currency. I don't know which country certainly has its own laws of putting this instrument somewhere in their regulations. But ESMA is skeptical of being the leader and for Europe and having a European regulation for these types of. Let me say first of all that we are not stamping any technology. We are regulators, and we actually we regulate securities. Even financial securities. So we don't stamp any blockchain technology, we don't stamp any platforms, any DLTs. We just want to regulate the securities that are on the blockchain, that are on any other applications. Mm-hmm. So what is interesting, though, is that we have to go and understand the technology, of course, in order to regulate the instruments on the technology. So again, we need to understand the technology and the risks that entail on the technology. And in this aspect, we have invented the Innovation Hub. We launched it in September 2018. And there we wanted we wanted to see the fintech and regtech solutions before they are launched into the market. And there we've seen a lot of people coming into the Securities Commission, even the one from the Americanos law firm already showing us their certificates that they issue under the blockchain technology. And what it came into our remit, though, is that we've seen that there is an interest for cryptos and cryptocurrencies. So, but this is again controversial because not all the cryptos are utility bills and means of payment. Mm-hmm. They can be classified as financial instruments as well. So this is a big issue, how to classify it, and if they entail any characteristics of financial instruments, that means that the provider using blockchain with a securities token can be actually licensed with our existing regulations. And this is very interesting because maybe our regulator, which is ESMA, or maybe nationally, we need to find we need to see the risks on this new technology and how it adjust into our existing regulation. And if it needs to be to issue any guidance, any regulations, or any national regulations that cover this issue, we will do that. And that's what we do under our Innovation Hub, seeing all these new applications, all these new technologies coming in, but also the instruments that are on the technology.
How do you find the success of the Innovation Hub so far? I mean, the sign-up, the usefulness for the...
It's on our website. Anybody who is interested to come to the Securities Commission and be advised. And we have a special section on our website where you can apply and give us an insight of your project. And then we can have a meeting with our people in the Securities Commission, the expertise, and there they can be advised how to proceed. But again, for the utility bills, we don't really have regulation, right? And there is where to decide whether to do a national one or whether to wait for ESMA to come up with a European regulation. But as I understand, Malta is running, and other regulators as well, European ones. So I don't think we have to be left behind. We will proceed as well. And we're already doing some drafting, but it's an early stage for now.
Okay, great. Now let's come to the Greek market, to the Greek reality. Mrs. Lazarakou, the chair of the Hellenic Capital Markets, what are the difficulties that derive from the inherent properties and characteristics of blockchains in the effort of drafting a policy framework that will regulate them for the Greek market?
Thank you for the question. I would also like to thank you for the invitation and congratulate for having this taken place in Athens. I want to start by let's say, answering first in a generic way, in the sense that blockchain, as we all know and as we all agree, is an emerging technology which has generated a lot of interest in the capital markets in general. So blockchain offers a new approach to data sharing and data management, which actually is being proposed, proposes solutions in order to face specific inefficiencies found already in the industry. So technology experts in fintech startups, market infrastructure providers, banks, investment firms maybe, are all working on the underlying technology and its potential uses. So what we understand is that success of any blockchain solution would depend on agreement within the ecosystem, which is composed, as we all know, from the developers, from the users, and from the regulators. So coming to the regulators, what Greece, before I go to Greece, let me just say some inherent problems that ESMA and other international, let's say, bodies has already provided that exist, which are, I have pointed out some here, so let me see from my, from my notes, cybersecurity of distributed ledgers, both inside and outside the network, operational issues, such as, for example, erroneous entries and coding errors in smart contracts, legal challenges, we heard some before, arising also from the cross-border transactions and recording ownership and determining the applicable law for records located in DLT networks across the multiple jurisdictions, competition issues, do we speak about the risk of monopolistic structures? So there are always inherent issues, as you mentioned in your question, that we need to make sure that we encounter and we try to address when trying to design how we're going to move forward the next day. So what we are doing is, in order to have, let's say, in order to make sure that we design a new future, and this is what Greece will also try to do, is to make sure that the industry has a collective view on the potential of the technology. So we need to make sure that we have shared all the relevant views, we collaborate, and we see what will be the next day and how we're going to do this as regulators at least. The CMC, the Capital Market Commission, has already established an innovation hub. So one of the ways is try to see whether we can let's say, listen to new ideas, listen to initiative through this innovation hub to see what are the initiatives that maybe the fintech companies would like to put forward, and then try to see how we can guide and how we can solve all these issues in order to make sure that that everything is done in a properly appropriate legal way. And why do I say legal way? Because we are positive in trying to see how the regulation will work, but at the same time, we want to make sure that everything is accompanied with guarantees that safeguard the protection of investors. So we must embrace, and we want to embrace, the fintech industry. We want to embrace the potential, and at the same time, show patience and invest in various innovative solutions to bring it beer. And the mission of the Capital Market Commission in general would be to make sure that we ensure transparency and compliance, of course, always in alignment with the EU, because we want to make sure that we are always in alignment with what the EU says in respect to all these regulations, but at the same time, try to make Greece financial fit for tomorrow's challenges, which one of them is blockchain, and make sure that we have strong now in the international scheme, which among other, it means that we want to try to put forward and support solutions for blockchain regulation. And maybe, as Mr. Kalogerou said, now is the time. Now is the time to see how we can move forward and support. Our intention is to support an environment which will be friendly for innovation and fintech industry in Greece.
Thank you. Dear Minister, Malta took and is leading the way. You are about to write, well, you drafted the manifesto, the DLT manifesto, that's what I call your legislative framework, and it might evolve as the European or the foundation of the European Constitution on DLT. What are the basic provisions of this legislative framework that countries in South European countries can collaborate with you and drive this forward?
Sure. Before answering that question, and I think I would tie actually the answer to that question, I would like to address also some of the points raised here. We heard that this industry is many of the times controversial, or there are international authorities that would not look so favorably to participate or to provide legislation for this industry. What we think is that something that there's no clarity in the way they can operate is always controversial.
Yeah.
If you don't have clarity whether this particular product falls under money markets, or whether it is the financial product, or it is a technological product, or any other form of product, it is going to be a controversial subject. So we started with that point, and we said, if we're going to leave it up to any other international institutions, we'll never get there. Whether it is ESMA, whether it is EBA, whether it is European Central Bank, whether it is IOPA, you name it and you have it. International institutions will never rock the system. They would continue to regulate the status quo, they would continue to operate within their comfort zone, and we saw this firsthand. When we're speaking with them, they were very collaborative, they were very open to discuss, but I don't think they were never ready to take the first step. And the indirect message that we were having is, okay, you are taking that first step. You can do that. If you get it right, we can say that we have supported you, but if you get it wrong, we say that it's your fault. And it's fine with us. I mean, if we have not taken that risk, we would not be discussing the fact whether the European Union would discuss the regulation of blockchain or crypto or any type of service. And being small and being nimble in this particular case is our biggest advantage. The fact that our policy, our politics are not dictated by big banks, by big players, etc., we could take that step to be courageous enough to provide this clarity. Out there was a total wild, wild west situation where operators in this field were crying out loud for sensible regulation, And that was basically what we have provided. We cannot expect that an innovative technology product would fit into the present traditional regulatory system. It will never happen because it's an innovative product. For an innovative product, you have to have an innovative legislation. We could have easily slightly amended our financial product to fit crypto in that, but that would serve us for about 6 months. A new innovative product would come out and we have to reinvent and to re-amend again that legislation. So what we have done is we have created an ad hoc legislation for this ecosystem, not for just the use of cryptocurrencies, because blockchain is much more than cryptocurrencies. You have the technology part, you have the financial aspect through cryptocurrency, but there are many much more uses to that. That is why we have created 3 pieces of legislation. One of the first legislation was to set up an ad hoc authority, the Malta Digital Innovation Authority, to regulate not blockchain, not actually regulate, because regulate is more, I would say to give trust to platforms. I was hearing a previous presentation where the person that was presenting was mentioning trust. And that's what we have to do in terms of innovative technologies. Provide trust that that particular product is transparent, is providing the service that it is saying on paper, and this authority is doing just that. It's providing a new service through the Innovative Technology Arrangement Services Act, which is our second piece of legislation that can provide certification to that particular platforms, which provides certainty from a central authority to that particular service that operators are providing to consumers in terms of technology. Then we have another piece of legislation, which is the VFA, the Virtual Financial Asset. And there again, we do not speak about blockchain. We speak about innovative technologies. That is, the legislation is technology agnostic, so that if we're speaking about new technologies in 1 year time, in 2 or 3 years time, we do not need to reinvent everything, because the term innovative technology already encloses all these innovative areas. And that is the way we actually dedicated to answer the request of the industry. The real players, the genuine players, wanted a structure, a framework, a certainty rather than framework. Certainty that what they're doing is actually not something which is bad to the people, bad to the market, bad to the stability. And this takes us to the traditional way of regulating. Because if we look at MiFID, the 3 main core principles are market stability, consumer protection, and market efficiency as well. So what we have done is we took the high-level principles of MiFID and employed them to this new legislation. I must say that we had already some experience in providing clarity to another form of technology economy, that is iGaming. Okay. Malta, we are, I think, the biggest regulator in the iGaming industry in Europe and one of the biggest in the world. And we took that line of thought and we have basically emulated what we have done in that industry in this particular industry to a certain aspect. And that is why it was well appreciated from the operators per se, and even from the regulators, because we actually have given them a lead where to operate, and now we're discussing even with other countries. I've been just before this panel meeting with my respective minister here in Greece and meeting different other ministers at a Mediterranean level, and then continue expanding at other European countries to emulate what we have done in Malta and other countries. If this is not expanded and operated even with other countries, this will never succeed. We will continue to see hardware made in China, software made in America, but nothing made in Europe. If we want to have our European trademark, we must accommodate innovation in Europe. Mm.
If I rephrase what you said, I would say that you took the bold decision that in a digital economy where innovation and technology is the key driver, it is highly risky to be risk averse, so that you took the risk to take the risky road.
I think you gave a good summary, yes.
All right, yes.
To what my colleague here said, I mean, from the regulator's point of view, of course, because of the protection of the investors, we are very concerned to regulate this type of instruments, if they're not instruments or utility bills, whatever, before we are sure that we can regulate and we can monitor those providers for the protection of the investors. Now, from the point of view of the technology, as a blockchain technology, we are in favor, of course, for different applications in the public sector, and that's what our government did lately. They passed a strategic planning for implementing the blockchain technology into different parts of the economy, either in the land registry or some other parts that this technology or DLT could not be a blockchain, could be another type, as we've seen in the previous speakers, to apply this in the different sectors of the economy. Of course, we are in favor of doing that, but when it comes to the protection of the investor, which is quite different thing, I think there is where we are skeptical in order to put the right regulation, that we are able to monitor those providers, that all the things that are now in place with the providers of financial instruments can be also in place with the providers of these types of cryptos. And one of the many issues that we were discussing now 1 year is how to monitor them specifically on AML issues. AML issues is the #1 problem that we faced and we are facing as regulators, because as you know, this type of assets, this type of assets, if I may call them assets, because I don't know how to name them, are anonymous. So it's like a bearer share. You don't know who is the owner. So how can you monitor as a regulator that this owner who holds the crypto is actually the owner of the crypto? So we are trying with different ways and find ways as regulators, as at least as Cizek, okay, I don't know if other regulators are concerned, how to monitor this, because in 2020, for the first time, Europe comes and says, you know, with the 5th directive, we are going to monitor these providers. And now it's the time that all regulators in Greece and everybody, we have to register such providers, that if they are in Cyprus or in Greece, and monitor them only for AML issues. And actually in Cyprus, we had a consultation paper back in February 2019, covering what the 5th directive already mentions, fiat money to cryptos, but it already gold-plate that into other areas to cover, like the FATF new consultation paper that it has. Mm-hmm. And we put also cryptos to cover. So we are moving further to what Europe is saying on the 5th directive. But as I said, we need to be sure, before we launch a new law, or a nationally, or even transpose a new law, how to monitor the market, how to monitor such providers, especially on the AML issues.
I think that the minister wants to add on this, or...
I think I shouldn't have said this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I always say, where there's a will, there's a way. In terms of regulating and providing regulation, we have provided this legislation now a year ago. We have just implemented our 4th AML directive, and we were in the process of starting now implementing the 5th AML. Before even starting to implementing the 5th AML, in our previous legislation, because we actually understood the technology behind these services, we have already included AML that covers crypto to crypto. As a country, we're not waiting for international institutions to tell us, look, you have to regulate, because as you rightly said, even the 5th AML does not cover crypto to crypto. And we're actually telling international institutions and European institutions that this is still not enough. But then I cannot understand and I cannot accept the reasons behind AML and the use of technology. we've been bombarded for the past years with scandals related to AML issues. And guess what? These were all done with fiat money, not with crypto. So let's not start with discussing, let's not go there because of AML, because the present situation has already failed us. So we have to understand what the products are there. And if we are going with the line of thought that we would not discuss or would not regulate because of AML issues, I think it's totally wrong, because companies are already operating these type of services. Mm-hmm. With or without regulation, you cannot stop an exchange operating in your country and providing these services. So I would rather prefer creating my own framework, leaving space for these operators to operate in a clear and transparent environment, showing what is allowed and what is not allowed, giving the regulator line of space and access to be able to access certain type of information. And yes, even through technology, there are ways and means on how you can regulate and provide information, even through RegTech and through other services. That is what we have listed in our legislation. Obviously, this is not the time to go into that detail, but there are ways and means. And have actually at least a clear picture of what type of operations are happening in my country, rather than just leave it out there because of the fear of not getting involved into certain discussions because they are very, it's a hot topic, or because there can be issues of discussions with regards to AML. Well, we already have cases of AML and big scandals with fiat AML. So let's talk about the real issues here as well.
If I may add something. I think I have to say something for both comments, because I don't think it's a matter of whether we are going to regulate now or later. What we need to make sure is that in the timing that we decide that we're going to regulate, we take into account all the relevant concerns, AML, market abuse, whatever is there. And the point is that depending on the product or service, because we speak about, let's say, crypto assets, and then we have to see all the relevant securities regulation and see what that means. For example, when we speak about market abuse, we speak about MiFID II platforms, we speak about whatever this is, let's say, related. But on the other hand, if we speak about a service, which is another issue. I mean, when we're going to use blockchain a service for other services, I mean, in general, the financial sector, then we need to see other concerns. So I agree with both of you that what we need to make sure is that we have already taken into account all these issues for the investor protection as well as the transparency and operation of the market.
Yeah, but in the name of investor protection, we develop, or we have the risk of developing, a risk-averse attitude. And I would ask a question to Mrs. Lazarakou, but I think the same question applies to all three of you. Where do you consider the fine line between the useful regulation and over-regulation and no or gray area regulation? Where is the fine line? Who draws this line? Is it up to each country to define its own thin line, what is over-regulation or under-regulated environment? Because technology is moving, China is moving, Canada is moving on, and we have the risk to find Europe, because of this risk-averse scholastic skepticism, allow me to use this word, to be left behind. So, what is the Greek answer on that?
Actually, you are right, and this is the biggest bet for any regulator, to make sure that they have a market which, on one hand, is an operational market and protects the investors, and also, let's say, allows for innovation and such solutions. And on the other, I mean, on one hand, is a market that is flexible and really promotes innovation, and on the other hand, is a market that really protects the investors at the same time and makes sure that there's no imbalances in the market. So that's a huge bet, and this is something that all which is not only the regulator, but it's also the persons who are, let's say, going to draft the relevant regulation, which is the ministries in in Greece, for example. So what we need to make sure is that we have a careful review of all the circumstances, and this is why I said in the beginning, collaboration is very important, because in order to design what you want to protect, you have to make sure that you know all the problems and concerns and considerations that may evolve. And in order to make sure that you are aware of all these issues, you have to collaborate with the industry. You have to see what are the proposals that are being put forward, what are the solutions that are being proposed, and then, as a regulator, you need to make sure that you put a break and you say, okay, let's see now, how can we evolve your idea? Because ideas and initiatives are great as long as also they guarantee protection of investors and protection of the market at the same time. So you need to make sure that you try to help the industry, let's say, proceed in a safe way and design it in a way that takes into account, as I said before, all the relevant considerations. So the balance is the big bet, and this is something that all regulators and ministries will have to try to, to win.
And also, just to add, because I completely agree, that proportionality is very important as well. I mean, I cannot imagine not to have the proportionality in all the regulations, even the European that they came the last 2 years, which is too many, not to have the proportionality. Otherwise, all the small or the large firms could all apply the same rules. And proportionality is the number one, even in this area.
Okay.
No, it's not an easy question. I think the crux of everything would be the operators on the ground. Many of the times, us policymakers, and I think even regulators, are not the best people to provide solutions to operations that are ongoing. Many of the times, solutions would have to come from the operators who really are the experts of the subject. We are not the experts. So, and this is what we have done in Malta. We have sat down with the operators and we said, look, tell us what are the challenges that you are finding. Tell us what are the clarities that you need to be defined. And then on those clarities, we build regulation, we build transparency, and we provide a framework that is workable. Because it is useless to have something nice on paper, bulky documents that you put them there. We say, okay, on paper they look nice, they block all the possible threats, but then they are cumbersome on the ground because it will not be workable. And operators will just go around because they are actually the experts, the most cunning people of us all. So we need to collaborate, as you rightly said, apart from regulators and policymakers, but more than that, with the operators.
Our countries are the small kids of Europe, and Brussels is still on its comfort zone. The banking regulation needs to be revisited and accommodate DLT slowly and steadily, but technology is moving fast, regulation is falling behind, and the gap is huge. So do you agree that we should probably raise our voice as the small kids of this family? The Met 7, let's say, and ask for a faster and more efficient alteration of the regulation, or even, we don't want to change any regulation, we just want to write a new chapter that will be an appendix on the existing regulation that will be more efficient. What is your answer on that?
Yeah, I perfectly agree. Let me start by saying there is hope. So at least, and I would not comment about the banking industry or banking situation, because it's better if I don't start from there. But at least at European level, there is hope. I've met several times, even at DG level, and they're looking favorably of the work that we're doing. And even the South EU Met Summit, the Met 7 that initiative that you mentioned, is also a very good platform. I think in May we started this initiative, for those of you who don't know, that we have joined forces, the 7 Mediterranean countries that form part of the European Union that's starting from Portugal, France, Italy, Cyprus, Malta. Don't think yes, those. That we have joined forces in terms of digital economy. We started with signing a declaration on DLT to export what we have done in Malta at a more pan-European level. And we've met also a month ago in Malta to continue and select few use cases to then have the practical use of technology. Ultimately, once we would have more political consensus, which there is political consensus on this front, we're meeting back again in February now in Italy. And that is a good sign that actually what we have started is now spreading at Mediterranean level, and ultimately will continue to expand further at European level. Even at EU level, in terms of Commission, Parliament, etc., we're seeing a movement in that regard that actually they're being much more open for discussion and for implementation. Even the several initiatives in terms of blockchain, in terms of having our own platform as Europe and other initiatives are heading in the right direction. So yes, I think we're moving ahead, maybe not as fast as we would wish, but that's okay, that's fine. But at least we're moving in the right direction.
From our point of view as regulators, we have to pressure ESMA, which is our regulator, to move faster, but also the European Commission to come out with this new regulation to cover these, the providers from A to Z, not only for AML issues, but also for the whole operation. But until that happens, I think it will pass 1 or 2 years. So everybody, I think now they are doing something nationally. And as I said, we are also preparing something as a Securities Commission nationally to cover the providers from A to Z, but starting with the AML first, transposing the fifth directive with some changes, which will cover also things that are not covered now, and then going forward with the national law. But also, you know, what I've seen is that we need to have a collaboration with the central bank as well, because this is also a big issue here in order to, you know, license providers, and the banking sector could not embrace the crypto world, so they cannot open accounts to this type of providers. This is a disadvantage, actually, if we don't move together with the central banks and the securities regulator doing something together on these issues. But even if they are not doing it because they are risk averse, as you said, even more than ESMA, I think we will proceed. And then there are banks that open accounts outside Cyprus or outside Malta or whatever, or Greece.
Okay, I'm going to leave room for questions so you can have a concluding remark. And
no, I just wanted to say that for the regulators in Europe, the most important issue, because we're a securities regulator, is actually related to crypto assets and what is going to happen with the regulations regarding crypto assets. So this is one major issue right now, and there are discussions regarding this, and we want to see which path to take, because in case we decide that they have characteristics that are like those of a financial instrument, then we need to see how all the relevant regulations are going to apply and all these issues. So we are in a transitioning period where it's a very interesting period, actually, where we need to see where the discussions will lead. That's, and of course, for Greece, I have to say again, sorry for just adding, that we have decided that we are going to have a friendly ecosystem, a friendly environment for fintech industry and regtech.
I think that we have in this room, in this conference, about 1,000 agents of change in daring to take the step forward. We have Malta that is already risking in the right direction, though. University of Nicosia, who in 2011 decided to embark into this journey. That was a very daring move, and congratulations. I would like to get some questions from you, audience, you agents of change. What kind of questions around regulatory and legal framework do you have, if any?
Most probably they would have some.
Also, please state your name and your...
Thank you very much. Alexis Nicolaou, I'm the CEO of Blocko, the spin-off from the University of Nicosia. One question we keep being asked by people we approach, by organizations, whether public or private, is how does this blockchain thing tie in with GDPR legislation? Of course, GDPR existed in a pre-blockchain era, and it was fashioned on the implicit assumption that databases are mechanisms for collecting, storing, and processing data.
In a centralized approach.
In a centralized approach. And of course, the coming of blockchain, especially public blockchains, changes all that. Both blockchains and GDPR legislation have as an inherent objective the data sovereignty. So perhaps blockchain can become a tool for achieving that objective. I just wanted your insights as to how the European Union, I'm sure Mrs. Kaili later might be able to give more of an insight, but as far as you know, how the European Union is considering redrafting or maybe writing an appendix, as Kyriacos mentioned earlier, to the existing legislation to accommodate for that change. Thank you.
I haven't heard that anything changes on the GDPR yet, because it's just implementing it, the existing one. But of course, it's one of the concerns. Any of the platforms, even if it's a DLT or if it's a blockchain or if it's MT4, MT5, any platforms used by the providers, it must be GDPR compliant. So it's up to the provider to do that. I mean, up to the provider to assess the risks and come up with ideas how this could be using such platforms could be compliant with GDPR. And not only with GDPR, also with best execution, because they're going also to other things. Best execution, transparency, connectivity of blockchain to our own systems, which we do have now systems connecting the transaction reportings that we need. I mean, a lot of things have to be accounted, and it's up to the provider to think about that and come up with ideas and come to us to discuss it. So it's not only GDPR, it's many questions arising, especially with the existing regulation already mentioned, because we do have the existing regulation, and I'm sure most of the tokens are security tokens, even most of them, they don't know it. And because they may have characteristics of security. So that's where I think mostly we need to concentrate changing the existing regulation or adding appendix, which I don't know if it will cover the GDPR, but
it has to be covered.
Yes, probably. And other things, though, in order to be sure that we give the right guidance to the market. So that's what we are actually doing now in the Securities Commission, seeing our existing regulations and see what guidance we have to do. One of the issues also is custody. I mean, now we do, the custody is under the banking sector, right, with the instruments, the financial instruments, or either in the investment firms, they have a custody. So what about the tokens? Who is going to have the custody? Are the wallets will be the substitute of the custody that we have now in our own regulation? So there are a lot of questions that need to be addressed for the existing regulations that we have, and add to cover some of the things that are.
Dear Minister, your response on that, since you've been through this journey?
Well, we have to understand that anything pan-European takes ages to be implemented. So from the first day that GDPR discussions were started up until they were implemented, DLT, more than 3 years, much more than 3 years, DLT was becoming more mainstream. So GDPR regulations was not compliant with new technology. And actually, I think you have answered your own question when you said maybe DLT can be an answer to that. And yes, regulations are not something cast in stone. Regulations are there to adapt to new realities and to be changed. And I think, yes, in terms of GDPR, first of all, let's say that GDPR was done with good intentions. And I strongly believe that that was the main reason. But sometimes it's easy to get into the mistake that with good intentions would come then much more regulation that would defeat the first scope of that particular regulation and make it implementable on the ground. So yes, I agree that most probably, and even at European level, I'm sure that there's the discussions at that level. I'm not speaking on behalf of the European Union here, but there are discussions on seeing how this GDPR regulations will be adaptable to new realities.
Well, in respect of time, we're just finished our time. I would like to thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mrs. Kalogerou. Thank you, Mrs. Lazarakou. I hope it has been enlightening for you to see the challenges that lie ahead of us. And please keep your momentum as agents of change. And we need to work closer as small geographies to drive change faster and better in the right direction. Thank you very much.